Large portions of the book of Isaiah are written in difficult Hebrew. Chapter 53 is even more difficult because the writer was focused on crafting an amazing song rather than, for example, the grammar. We'll begin by taking a look at the Great Isaiah Scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls website. As you can see, it's difficult for the average person to pick out where chapter 53 begins and ends. That's because the use of chapter and verse numbers weren't implemented until a much later date. Here is chapter 53. And without any numbers, it's difficult to tell where one verse begins and another one ends unless you know where to look. To demonstrate, here are the 12 verses of this chapter. Now, despite chapters being a later addition, what we call chapter 53 is very unique when compared to, for example, the chapters that immediately precede or come after it. And that's because, unlike them, chapter 53 is a song. Let's look at the qualities of the Song of Isaiah, using only a few segments of a few verses. I'll be addressing each of these qualities in later videos in more detail, so please don't panic as I speed through this. Cadence. If we refer to each syllable as a beat, then every segment of verse 1 has 9 beats, and every segment of verse 2 has 8 beats. Most of the verses are within this cadence range. Sometimes words are chosen or omitted simply for their cadence. Repetitions of sounds. The second doublet of the quatrain, that is verse 2, begins with the sounds lo, 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 and also has r, r. Listen for it. Lo to r, lo, velo, hadar. Much of this chapter has similar types of sound repetitions, which also influenced the writer as to which words to choose. And that brings us to rhyming. As we saw, the words to'ar and hadar were chosen for the sound repetitions, but they were also chosen for the rhyming. The word hadar is almost never used to describe a person, but rather a fruit that one delights in, one desires, but is also the best choice for rhyming. For Isaiah, the usual meaning will take a back seat to the song. Symbolism. There are rich metaphors shared by many of the writers of Scripture. At the beginning of verse 2, we see plant metaphors that are used by other writers with the same intention in mind. For example, yonek are the suckers that extend upward from the roots of a tree, and is often a metaphor for one's descendants. Sometimes it is singular, sometimes plural, sometimes the gender changes. But to Isaiah, the grammar isn't as important as the visual that it creates. Pronoun switching. The use of the word he is often vague. For example, in verse 2 it used he several times, but it switches between 4 different personalities within that verse, with no hint when it was doing that. It is a source of a lot of confusion among many who are trying to force the term he into a single personality. Parallelisms is a particular style used by prose and songs where the words or idea of one segment mirrors the next. This mirroring can be a duplication or an opposition. For example, in the first segment of verse 2, we have it going up to Jerusalem with the descendants, using one plant metaphor, and the next segment speaks of an earlier time, using a different plant metaphor, those who went down into the Tzia, a popular metaphor for a destroyed Babylon. Chiasmus. A chiastic structure, or a chiasmus, is an offshoot of parallelisms, where you often have a central idea being pointed to by other terms. Think of a sandwich filling called do not kill, and there's one slice of bread on top called arrest the person, and a parallel one on the bottom called the man is arrested. Some chiastic structures are very extensive, with a large number of equal slices of bread on top and bottom matching each other, and sometimes there's nothing in the middle. We see a very simple chiasmus in verse 2. And finally we have what is called hapax legomenon. In biblical use, this refers to a word or a term that only appears once in the entire Tanakh, and Isaiah uses that a lot. Nowhere else but in verse 2, for example, will you find the expression formless, and there are some words that we can only guess at their intended meaning, such as mecholal in verse 5, which seems to mean some sort of harm in context, but the NIV renders as pierced for ideological reasons. It is important to note that Isaiah is not saying anything that is new. Many of the prophets, such as Ezekiel, Zechariah, Hosea, and others, made the same kind of promises. But what is unique about Isaiah is that he says all of this with a splendid song, one that's worth hearing. And I said hearing because songwriters did not write the songs for others to read, but instead to be listened to. That's why they spent so much time gathering together the right kinds of sounds, the cadence, the matching imagery, the clever wordplay for people to hear. And it's a pity that we've lost the melody of the song, but the cadence and tone is still there, waiting to be expressed from a singer's lips, and while the melody can be yours, the song will always be his. So thank you for watching. Please click on the like and subscribe buttons below. And as always, I'm Elisha Ben Abuya, and I wish you all the best.